This is more than a simple hero car review for me. This is my hero car. Well, I don't mean it's actually mine. This car's owned by BMW UK, but the E39 M5 was an actual hero car that, after driving one back in about 1999, I just had to buy for myself. So a few years later, I did. And the reason why I bought myself an M5 started way back when I was a little kid, because every time I got into a car that was meant to be fast, it would end up disappointing me. For example, I remember getting to my friend's mum's XR3i, which at the time, and I remind you, I was a kid, was meant to be the fastest thing ever. And I thought it was going to be girding my face off, but when she put her foot down, it was, is that it? And I genuinely, the disappointment when I was that age, I can still remember it now, thinking, there's just nothing here, this is terrible. And my journey of disappointment continued even as the cars I was driving were getting faster and faster. For example, in the mid-90s, Jaguar brought out the X300, and I remember driving a new XJR6, the 4-litre supercharged straight six with a manual gearbox, about 326 horsepower or something like that, I think it had at the time. And I thought this was going to be the star car, this is going to be the one that was going to pique my interest. And I drove it, and it was quick, to be fair, but it still wasn't that electrifying sort of quick, the real set your hair on fire kind of stuff. But then I drove this, the E39 M5, in about 1999, just after it had come out, something like that. And that was the first time I put my foot down in a car and I just went, wow, this is properly fast. And that was the point there and then when I just fell in love with the E39. And when I left my job as a Ferrari salesman in about 2005 and I went off to start my own business, I lost access to all these fast cars that I had before. So not just Ferraris, but Porsches and Lamborghinis, everything. And I thought to myself, I need a car for my kicks and giggles. I need a car that's got some pace, but also practicality. And there was only one thing that figured in my mind. I thought back to that day when I first drove an E39 and I thought, I need one of them. Mine was finished in carbon black, but in every other respect it was pretty much identical to the car we have here. It had the same two-tone Napa leather, and also it was a 2001 facelift model with the bigger sat-nav screen and an onboard TV, which was mostly useless because it was an analogue TV and you could never get a decent signal. But the rest of the car was simply sensational. That's because the E39 was one of those seminal cars. It blew away the opposition. Even the regular 6-cylinder versions were beautifully engineered right the way through, from the ride to the handling, the quiet cruising, and of course the interior quality. This wasn't just better than the E34 5 Series that preceded it, it was leagues better than any other car of the time. So when they brought out the M5 version, well, it was almost a given it was going to be something exceptional, which, of course, it transpired to be. Remember to head over to pistonheads.com after watching this video to research and buy your next car. And for me, the E39 M5 is peak M5. I know it wasn't hand-built like the previous models, and I know it was far more mass-produced on a normal production line than those, and produced in bigger numbers as well. But the thing is, it had way more performance and way more speed than any of its predecessors. But for me, what's so great about the E39 is it's the last of the really analog M5s. We do have a sport button, and if you press it down here, it adds weight to the steering and sharpens up the throttle response. Just don't bother with that, it's pointless. And we also had a DSC off button. Now that one you do need, which we'll talk about later on. But in terms of everything else, there was no SMG gearbox, there was no gearbox speed control, no EDIF, no adaptive suspension, no sports exhaust, nothing like that. All you had with this car was a big V8 engine, a manual gearbox, and a mechanically limited slip diff. And that's all you need. And that V8 engine was just the heart of this car. The S62 was BMW Motorsport's first V8 engine, and it was a joyous thing. And it was full of M Sport bits as well, trick bits like individual throttle bodies for each of the 8 cylinders, a drive-by-wire throttle system, and it also had double Vanos variable valve timing for not just the inlet but also the exhaust valve timing. And it really made it want to rev, so much so that it developed 400 horsepower at 6,600 RPM, but it would also rev all the way to 7,000 RPM. And it was torquey too, 369 pound-foot of torque at 3,800 RPM. So there was no shortage of performance with this car. And with all that power and torque, it did something. It made this car properly fast. 0 to 60 was 4.8 seconds, and it went on to do an electronically limited 155 miles an hour. But I know from personal experience that it didn't stop at 155 miles an hour, because on one of my expeditions across Europe, I ended up driving pretty much flat out just to see where it would get to, and it didn't stop accelerating till an indicated 165 miles an hour. And it wasn't just labouring up to 165 miles an hour, it was pulling up to 165 miles an hour. But the other side of this engine, the other side of this high revving, manic performing engine, was also its amazing docility, because when you weren't driving it flat out, it was really torquey low down as well. Even though it wasn't turbocharged, it still had 184 pounds-foot of torque from 1,000 RPM, so basically just above idle, and of course paired with a manual gearbox, a proper manual gearbox. Now, it isn't the best manual gearbox, I'll be honest with you. So a typical sort of BMW box, quite springy, a little bit notchy. You have to kind of let this gearbox warm up, because in the morning it's really like that, but once you get some heat into it, it's not too bad. And in fact, if I really had to criticise one area of the car, it wouldn't be the gearbox, it would be the clutch. The one bit of the E39 M5 that I would say is under-engineered. You always end up with a bit of clutch slip if you try and do any quick gear changes, because if you've still got the clutch just slightly pressed as you're bringing it up and then just getting on the gas with your speedy change, then you'll just find the engine spins up because the clutch just can't take it. And it's one of the few cars I've ever experienced that phenomenon in. So my advice to you is, if you get yourself an M5 E39 and you end up having to change the clutch, upgrade it to something a bit more heavy duty, because it will serve you well. I wanted to stop just for a minute to talk to you about why the E39 as a whole, not just the M5, was such a special thing, because it's not just relating to the driving dynamics of this car and that engine and everything else. This generation of 5 Series was, to me, one of those seminal cars, an exceptional car that felt like it had no expense spared in its engineering. And that just goes through to the interior. I mean, look at it in here. This one's lovely because it's got the Napa leather and everything else that comes with the M5, and it's also stitched down here. But all the materials, everything is just so lovely and luxurious and plush, but beautifully put together. They didn't need to spend this kind of money, but they did. Look, when you press the sat-nav screen and you want to find your radio cassette player, it does that. That's just so cool. And it's not just the smooth movement of the screen. Look, when you press the ashtray, this has always fascinated me. Press the ashtray and it just rises up softly. And then there's, at night, there's a little luminous ring around here that just glows orange, just to so you know where you're stubbing out your cigarette. This car has something that my car didn't have, which is the multi-roller phone. Look at that. Cool. And it's even just the thoughtfulness of what they did with this car. So, as you'll probably know, the E39 has a rechargeable torch that plugs into the glove box. So you've always got light when you need it. That could save your life. But it wasn't just the engine that I loved about my car, and indeed love about all E39 M5s. It was also the handling, because it's such a lovely, benign chassis, so progressive, to the point that, genuinely, I'm not just sitting there kind of saying this to look like a hero, but I would always drive it everywhere with the ESP off, because, I don't know, I just wanted to experience around every roundabout or any opportunity just to play with the back end, because it never felt threatening. It never does feel threatening. Even on days like this, when the weather is really against you, you can still have fun in this car without ever feeling like you're going to, I don't know, land up backwards in a hedge or something. And part of the reason for that is because the car's so well set up, it's so well balanced in every respect, from the damping to the way the diff is locked up, so you can just feel just as it goes like that. It's just really easy to control. And of course, a big part of that is the way the engine is so tractable, being naturally aspirated, of course. You can so much more easily predict all the torque than you can with a turbocharged engine. And it just all makes the car so much more fun and engaging. It just ends up sort of a car that you can kind of pick your angles, whether you want just a little slide on the exit of the corner, or if you've got a bit more runoff and you want to have a little bit more of a play, a proper little wang of the tail. Look at that lovely thing. And I'll tell you something else about getting reacquainted with this car, is the fact that back in its day, the 5 Series was a big car, right? This car, I've just got back into it, it feels way smaller than a 3 Series, a current 3 Series or a 4 Series, and I've no idea whether the dimensions back that up. But it's not just that it feels small, it feels light and nimble, and also I can see out of it really easily as well, which is something you really do notice compared to the modern cars. Look, I've got relatively thin windscreen pillars and the doors only come to here, and I can see all around the front and the side of the car. It really makes a massive difference to just, when you want to really press on down roads like this, you can just attack a bit more. Again, it's all about building confidence, and this car is all about building confidence. It was so comfortable as well. M Sport gave it different shocks and lowered the springs. It also added those gorgeous 18-inch chrome effect wheels, but none of this ruined the ride. And I put that down to the depth of engineering in the basic E39 platform with its aluminium front suspension components and a really good multi-link setup at the rear. And it was so quiet on the motorway, it was a car you could just cruise in all day long. And I know that because that's what I did in my car a lot of the time. I used my M5 as an M5 should be used. It was my only car, so it went to the supermarkets, but also the south of France on holidays and every single thing in between. And it did it all perfectly, without ever missing a beat for the 6 or 7 years I owned it. And then there was a guy I bought my car off. So back in the day, when I was thinking about buying one of these, you know, in that phase when you're thinking, well, I will buy one, but I'm just going to start looking, and it'll probably be the 5th or 6th one I end up buying. Well, the one I ended up buying was the very first one I went to see, and I'd only just taken a deposit just as a, I don't know, sort of cursory thing as I left the house. I thought, well, I better take one just in case, but never expected to buy the first one. Then I turned up to this house in Warwickshire, big house, fantastic looking place. I started talking to him, and the reason why he was selling it was because he'd done about 20,000 miles a year, and it was 3 years old, and that's why I could afford it, because it was a little bit higher mileage, done 60,000 miles. He wanted to get rid of it, not because he had any problems with it, but he just said, I don't want to push it too far and end up hammering it too much and just completely trouncing the value of it. So I said, what are you going to buy next? You're going to buy the V10, which had just come out at the time. And he went, no, I don't like it. I don't like the look of it, and I don't like the complexity of it. I just really like the E39. So I said, what are you going to buy then if you're not going to buy a V10? And he went, I'll show you. And he walked me over to his garage, opened the door, and there, sitting in the garage, was another E39, exactly the same colour as this one actually. And he'd searched around for it and bought it from a fella in London, specifically because it had 5,000 miles on. So effectively he could just reset the clock and go again. Go back to a car he loved and adored, had done 60,000 miles in, had to get rid of it, the old one, but then carry it on and go again. And I just thought that was a nice testament to this car and why it's so special and why it gets under people's skin. And I agreed. I still do all these years later, as it happens. I sold mine when it was absolutely mint for £12,000. But having driven this one, it's not the fact that I sold it for so little that I regret, it's the fact that I sold it at all. If I had to describe the perfect classic car, taking everything into consideration, the blend of old and new, the speed, the comfort, the practicality, the excitement, is there a better car than this? Personally, I don't think so, but if you want to let us know your recommendations for the perfect classic car in the comments below, we'd be happy to receive them. The main thing is we really hope you've enjoyed watching this PH Heroes video on a proper PH Hero car. If you did, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more hero car videos like this.